Welcome to Information for Activation, Grassroots North Shore's webinar series. Tonight we have Chris Ahmuty from the Executive Director of the ACLU. Chris has served as Executive Director of the ACLU since 1922. Since then, Chris has led the organization through, shall we say, tumultuous times for civil liberties in Wisconsin and our nation. He frequently speaks and writes about the ACLU and civil liberties in Wisconsin for audiences large and small across the state. Working with the affiliate board, he has seen to it that the affiliate is well managed and in sound fiscal shape. His priorities have included building an exemplary staff, which has tripled since 1992. And I would like to present Chris. And I will pull up his slides, and I will turn it over to you, Chris. And here comes your presentation. It's all yours.
If you can hear, we have fire sirens outside introducing my presentation tonight. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Ahmuty, Executive Director of the ACLU of Wisconsin. And we're really pleased that Grassroots North Shore was generous enough to give us this opportunity to explain some of the things that are going on as we approach the 60th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. May 17th, 1954, 60 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, ruled that segregation in education was unconstitutional. It ruled that separate school facilities were inherently unequal, and that's something to celebrate. But we still have a long ways to go, unfortunately, to fulfill the promise of Brown versus Board. And I'll tell you a little bit later about some of the things that are going on to recognize that important anniversary and increase the public's awareness around the importance of educational opportunity for everybody and the importance of public education as a bulwark of our democracy. So that's the title for the presentation that you see on your screen, hopefully. Public education is the bulwark of democracy. You know, for a long time, we've had a mix of private, public, parochial schools, even homeschooling in Wisconsin. And this mix has worked well for many students and their families, but unfortunately, it's never worked for all students. And in recent decades, taxpayer support for education has been reallocated in ways that has degraded the mix, especially for public schools in both urban and rural settings, especially for public schools that have had to serve student bodies made up of an increasingly large number of children living in concentrated poverty, having special needs, or needing English language learning. So that's the issue that we're going to try to address tonight. And as we go along, I'm going to welcome your questions. Just type them into the chat box on your screen. And at the end of the remarks that I have to open up this debate, we'll have time for more questions and answers, hopefully. But don't be shy about being as engaged and interactive as possible. So public education in Wisconsin, all children in Wisconsin have a constitutional right in the state constitution, Article 10, Section 3, to a free public education that's appropriate. The public schools are where the founders of Wisconsin, the framers of the Wisconsin Constitution, thought that most students would get their education to prepare them for life, prepare them to be engaged citizens here in Wisconsin. The public schools, are our schools, and they're different from private schools and parochial schools in a number of important ways. They're required to serve all students, including students having special needs. They must not discriminate against students on the basis of race, gender, ability, or sexual orientation. They must provide students a safe learning environment where students have rights and responsibilities appropriate to their age. They allow community members, parents, and non-members alike a role in decision-making. They often allow parents a role in governance at the individual school level. And of course, school districts are governed by an elected board of school directors accountable to the voters. Few private and parochial schools can match public education in these important measures that taken as a whole constitute an important bulwark of our democracy. Local control is and has been for the longest time central to the Wisconsin way of providing a public education to students. In MPS, it's gone to the extent that in schools there are governance bodies composed of students, parents, and caregivers who are partners with teachers, with the administration in terms of seeing that things are done in that school that are for the benefit of children and families, and also to make sure that no child is discriminated against. So local control has been important, and as I alluded to before, you don't have that governance function in most parochial voucher schools, most private voucher schools. So what don't you get at the voucher schools? They don't have to provide the same level of special ed services. They don't have to deal with English language learners. They don't have to deal with homeless children. They don't have to have the same credentialing for teachers. There's all kinds of things that you don't get with the voucher schools. So true, this mix is out there, and you've got the public, private, and parochial, and the home schools, but the public schools really are quite a bit different in terms of what they provide for parents and students. And as I said before, the legislature, special interests who have influence in the legislature, since the early 90s have created an alternative taxpayer-funded system in Wisconsin, the voucher system and private charters. And that's really making it difficult for the public schools to advance and move ahead the way we would like. The voucher schools, have gotten, since the 1990, $1.3 billion from the taxpayers. In the fiscal year 2011-2012, $142 million went to private voucher schools in Milwaukee. So what are we getting for that? Not much. Certainly we're not having the transformation of education in our state that the promoters of vouchers way back when in the 90s promised. In fact, when you compare apple to apples in terms of outcomes and achievement for students, the best study, one that was released by the Wisconsin Department of Public Education in 2011, shows that MPS students are doing better in on some of those tests in math and reading. The math scores particularly troubling in the report that found that while 48% of Milwaukee Public School students scored proficient or better in math, only 34% of voucher students scored proficient or better. So there's all this hullabaloo about having this experiment, having this different system that would transform education in the state, and it has perhaps transformed education in the state, but not in a good way. It really has taken money, taken resources, taken constituencies out of public education, out of the traditional way that we used to provide for education, and created problems that leave us with a distraction and a fiscal drain. There are still too many public schools that have problems in the Milwaukee public school system. But the voucher system has not provided the competition that was supposed to make everything get better. Another thing is you have to consider, when you ask the question, what are you and other Wisconsin taxpayers getting for this $1.3 billion investment, you have to ask yourself, what is being taught? Religious schools certainly are free to teach whatever they want from their religious perspective. But if taxpayers have an interest in preparing students for jobs for the 21st century, denying the findings of science are not going to prepare those voucher students. Many of the voucher schools in Milwaukee were always religious schools. A recent study has found that 15 of those voucher schools we're seeing in Milwaukee teach creation science. I think we've really been taken aback by the fact that taxpayers are supporting religious viewpoints. It amounts to a subsidy for religion, and when you think of how the voucher program has expanded now statewide, it's really pretty disturbing. So there are these problems in the voucher program, but what has been the legislature's response to the voucher program? Well, the legislature's response to the failures has been one of denial, and legislators were convinced to look the other way by leaving the voucher program alone, let it be exempt from open records law, forget meaningful review of achievement by the Department of Public Instruction. If you've got talk now about accountability in the schools, well, I think that recent talk about accountability is more about locking up market share for some schools already in the program than measuring voucher schools on the basis of educational standards. So it's a mess. Milwaukee Public Schools, there are some fine schools. There's some other schools that, for a variety of reasons, aren't providing students with an adequate education. Special needs is a particularly difficult issue in Milwaukee Public Schools. But the voucher schools, the private charter schools, all of these other things, they haven't provided competition that's fixed Milwaukee Public Schools. That was always some kind of ivory tower kind of promise anyway. And for the sake of the students, the ones that go to voucher schools, sure, there are some good voucher schools, but far too many of those students, and I think you can say the voucher program as a whole, they're not doing any better than MPS, and as we've seen from that one study and other indicators too, they might even be doing worse in some regard. So you've got this mess that's developed over 3 decades. Since the early 90s, there's been failures of leadership and public policy all over the place. Milwaukee is struggling with a number of problems, but instead you have a problem where you've got schools that aren't doing all that they can, and you have taxpayer funding for schools that are teaching religion at taxpayer expense. And what's more, they're also, some of them, teaching lessons that you could never teach in the public schools, messages that are homophobic or stereotyping women. The bargain was made to have religious voucher schools that could be sectarian, and because if religion's important to them, they should be able to do that. And St. Marcus School in Milwaukee is a good example of a school that's staying true to its religious beliefs, but it's hard to imagine that it was intended that taxpayers should have to pay for this. The gap that we have now in achievement for particularly minority students is pretty devastating when you think of it. And what does it mean? What does it matter to all of us in the Milwaukee metro area? Frankly, Wisconsin can't afford to have 2 taxpayer-funded school systems. And beyond the dollars, especially in the Milwaukee metro area and the Madison public schools, we can't allow the racial and achievement gap to hold us back. Can't continue unabated. Voucher schools are not the answer to narrowing this gap. They've been an unfortunate distraction. They've been a debilitating monetary drain on the serious work that still needs to be done. What's happening because of this failure to fulfill the promise of Brown versus Board of Education and the failure to fulfill the constitutional right to free and adequate education that's enshrined in the Wisconsin State Constitution? Well, for Milwaukee, for MPS students, for the metro area, for the whole state of Wisconsin, it's really quite disturbing and quite unfortunate, because what's happening, in effect, the schools have been part of what could be called a school-to-prison pipeline. The school-to-prison pipeline means that many children, particularly minority children in urban schools, but also in other schools around the state, and there's real problems with that. Before we go on to the school-to-prison pipeline, let me deal with a question that's come in. And one of our folks asked, do charter schools have to teach to the Common Core with all of its mandated testing? Well, the Common Core is not the first time that we've had systems proposed that are going to try to remedy the situation in the schools. Remember No Child Left Behind and all the testing that it required, where we found that in public schools that had to try to adhere to No Child Left Behind and now to Common Core, we found that people were going out and teaching towards the test, not teaching to the individual issues and for the child. So no private voucher schools, private charter schools. The standards that are set for curriculum are not nearly as rigorous, and the mandates that are on public schools, such as No Child Left Behind or Common Core, regardless of what you think of Common Core, voucher schools, private charter schools are supposed to be, experiments. They can do what they want to a large degree when it comes to curriculum. So certainly if the public schools are going to address some of the shortfalls that we have in the public schools, they've got to be able to start teaching to students in ways that aren't based on, teaching towards the test. They've got to really be able to treat individual students and deal with their needs. There are a host of things that can be done. Voucher proponents, private charter proponents say, oh, this isn't about money. We can do this for less money per student. That's really disingenuous. You can keep having a mantra, oh, it's not about money, but to some extent, it's unavoidable that when you set up a system that's based on keeping costs low, subsidizing religion, and in some cases making a profit, there's going to be problems in those schools, and we shouldn't be surprised about that. So, if the best argument that voucher proponents now have is, oh, it saves us money, that really isn't going to go very far if we have people that are serious and want to correct the problems in our educational system, particularly those problems that affect young people who are going to end up in this school-to-prison pipeline. There's a lot of effort right now at reducing over-incarceration in the prison system in Wisconsin. Wisconsin leads the nation when it comes to mass incarceration of African American men of working age. In 2010, it was just startling, the number that are in prison or have been in prison, and that have serious consequences for their communities and the whole metro area, the whole state, if you will. And if we're going to have an effort to reduce over-incarceration, and right now it's very hopeful. There's bipartisan support for reducing over-incarceration. But if you don't do something to cut off the pipeline at the start, you're just going to have, it's going to be futile in terms of dealing with over-incarceration. So the graphic that's up on the screen now, it lets us know that 12.8% of the state's African American men behind bars as of 2010, twice the national average. And obviously, there's also great racial disparity in this. It's not that white men are incarcerated at the same rate. No, they're not. There's racial disparities. So how are you going to fix that problem if you can't do something to cut off the school-to-prison pipeline and do something to turn around the public schools? Well, fortunately, there are some things that you can do, some things that the ACLU is doing, and other folks as well. I want to skip ahead a couple slides and talk about Schools and Communities United. On the screen you can see their URL. May 17th in Milwaukee, there's going to be a really wonderful effort to highlight what needs to be done to fulfill the promise of Brown versus Board of Education. There's going to be a march, and then from 11 to 2:30 programs at Milwaukee School of the Arts. You can go on to the Schools and United Communities website and find information about how to get in the march, how to get to the activities at Milwaukee School of the Arts. So finally, and this is after many years, it's certainly frustrated us at the ACLU, at the American Civil Liberties Union, trying to deal with school issues. You almost have to say things have gotten so bad, and the problems coming out of Madison have gotten so much worse. There's always been, a drain on resources to fix the problems we have in education. School funding has been a mess. This voucher expansion has been a mess. And you wonder now, have things gotten so bad that people will take notice and will stop listening to the special interests that, sputter, and all they can do is tell you, vouchers cost less. Because really in Milwaukee, and I don't want to depress people, but there's just a whole series of quality of life indicators where Milwaukee is among the worst in the nation. We got another question. I think we can sort of segue into questions here. And it asks, are there any legal actions at the moment, especially dealing with separation of church and state? So let me talk about that in terms of legal action regarding a number of the aspects of the school system, including religious issues. Right now, legal action from that most affects the voucher schools is actually around the issue of special needs. You may have even seen this in the paper. Conservative supporters of voucher schools are really exercised because the federal government, at the urging of the ACLU of Wisconsin and Disability Rights Wisconsin, got after the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction to see what they were doing for children with special needs. And it's been our contention for a long time that that voucher schools are not adequately serving children with special needs. And so we at the ACLU and others have been pushing the federal government, pushing the Department of Public Instruction to get at those issues. The proponents of voucher schools, and apparently there's some influence or something going on or not going on at the Department of Public Instruction, have been very reticent to release information that would let us evaluate whether or not the anecdotal complaints and the other evidence that we have of discrimination based on disability is actually going on. Now remember, I said before that open records, public meeting laws don't apply, and DPI apparently is thinking, well, it's difficult to get this information, so what do we do? The ACLU is going to make sure that they don't get away with just, absolving the voucher schools of engaging in discrimination. You have a similar problem when it comes to finding out about religious practices at voucher schools. Now, as I said before, when it was set up, it was understood that religious voucher schools could participate. The Wisconsin Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court have allowed that, but I don't know that anyone thought that they would become so predominant in the voucher program where so many of the schools are religious, or that they would include in their curriculum, in their teaching, things that could never happen in the public schools, because while they may be acceptable as personal beliefs, they're not acceptable in terms of the public. For instance, discrimination, homophobic rhetoric and action, the anti-woman discrimination that you can have, all in the name of religion. Now, you know, the ACLU would support a religious institution in their free exercise of religion. You know, we have supported a sect down in Florida where sacrificing chickens was part of their religious practice, and we will be, you know, the first to stand up for the religious rights of all Americans, regardless of what they believe or if they don't believe at all. But when it comes to taking taxpayer money to do that, I don't think anybody really envisioned that it would become as distorted as it has been. So right now, given the law that's in place, there are no challenges to the religious practices of the voucher schools, but there has been and continues to be a lot of effort to try to get all the schools to be more accountable, to be more transparent, to be more open, things that are part of the mindset of people in the public school system, but not in the voucher and charter schools. So I think I want to call for more questions and begin to sort of summarize and let you know more about what's happening. I already mentioned the activities this Saturday. I encourage everybody to go to the Schools and Communities United website to find out more about it. So, yes, in some ways, in the 60 years since the Brown decision, things have gotten worse in terms of public schools. Some of this, is related to larger social economic issues. It used to be that you could go to high school anywhere in Wisconsin, graduate, and go out and get a family-sustaining job in manufacturing. Well, that just won't work anymore. The demands on schools in terms of preparing students for the workforce in the 21st century have changed dramatically. Other changes besides globalization that are sort of broad socioeconomic factors have been particularly distressing in the Milwaukee area, because since the Milwaukee public schools were ordered to desegregate in the 1970s, we've seen white flight to the suburbs, particularly to, and not just suburbs within Milwaukee County, but also to Washington, Ozaukee, Washington counties. And the racial segregation that has resulted has made it really difficult to solve these problems. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel has recently run a series of stories about the political segregation that has taken place in Milwaukee, in Metro Milwaukee. Well, what the story didn't talk about, what the series didn't talk about, was how some of that political division and the racial segregation is really a result of the racial segregation. And we have had instances where it's not just people are moving to the suburbs because they like grass, but rather there are institutional policies and laws and actions that have embedded the racial segregation in our metro area. When you think of all the money that's been spent on freeways to chop up the city and to make it easier to go out to the suburbs. When you think of exclusionary zoning in suburbs where the lot sizes are so large that you can't have affordable housing, and there's really a serious problem with affordable housing in the suburbs. So there are all these larger society issues, but if we can't get over those, if we can't get together and solve the problems that are facing us in terms of education and public education in our metro area, it's going to be very difficult. But finally, people are beginning to rally around the fulfillment of the promise of Brown. There's Saturday's activities, and there's things that you can do to stay informed. Let me make a final call for questions here, and we actually have one that just came in, and then I'll respond to the questions, and then we'll wrap it up, and I'll leave you with information on how to follow us and how to get involved. So the question is, which partner organizations does ACLU work with? Well, there are, a host of organizations that the ACLU works with. You have to understand that the ACLU has a broad agenda, and when you look at public education, it's also, it's trying to improve public education so that all children across the state of Wisconsin public schools get an adequate education, a non-discriminatory education, one where they're in a safe learning environment and there isn't bullying and homophobic and anti-Indian slurs, et cetera, et cetera. But we also get into large systems that are related to that, as I was talking about with the school-to-prison pipeline. So in the education field and others, among the partners that we work with are the NAACP Milwaukee branch, and I think what I'm going to do is read you the list of organizations that are partners in Schools and Communities United. So here are those member organizations of Schools and Communities United. 9 to 5 Wisconsin, American Civil Liberties Union of Wisconsin, American Federation of Teachers Local 212, Centro Hispano, Alumni Public Schools, Institute for Wisconsin's Future, LGBT Community Center, Milwaukee Inner City Congregations Allied for Hope, MICA, MTEA, NAACP Milwaukee Branch, Parents for Public Schools, Southeast United Educators, Voces de la Frontera, and the Yes Youth Empowered in the Struggle Project, Wisconsin Jobs Now, Wisconsin Voices, Wisconsin Women Informed. And, those are the ones that we work with most closely in educational matters. but there's others that are related to issues. If you looked at the sort of the core group of organizations that we partner with most often, it's going to be the ACLU, the NAACP, MICA, VOSIS, Disability Rights Wisconsin, and then on some issues, Midwest Environmental Advocates and others. So hopefully that will give you an idea of where the ACLU is sort of positioned in all this. You can then follow us, and you can go to the website and get more information. I don't have a problem with you, anybody, sending me an email too. I may ask someone more knowledgeable than me to deal with it, but we are really happy to communicate with folks and get the message out. So I'm going to wrap things up now, and we're going to bring this to a close, and presumably the grassroots North Shore people will sign off, and I want to thank you for participating. Thank you for your questions, and we've gone over a little time already, so thank you once again. And I'll turn it over to the grassroots North Shore folks. Thanks a lot.